All right. Like I said, we got to sprint through the day. I let that go on a little bit too long. Next up, we have Matt Sexton, solutions architect at booking.com, to talk about building the graph at booking.com. Matt, welcome to the stage.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm pretty good.
Great. So I'm going to let you dive in. I'm going to remind everyone, if you have questions for Matt for after the session, be sure to post them over in chat. And Matt, take it away.
Well, I thought today I'd talk to you all about what it is, what we had to do to get the graph implemented at Booking, why we chose to do it, and what the benefits are that we got out of it. But a lot of it really is how we ended up selling the graph to the business and to the tech folk at Booking in order for us to get this implemented. And I'll talk a little bit about what our journey was for that. So before we get into that, it probably is a good idea to talk a little bit about Booking, what Booking is like before the graph. Booking has a 25-plus-year-old code base, and it's been a very successful business in the travel industry. I'm sure a lot of you have used Booking. It's very, very well known around the world, and it's had a lot of really good things that it's built into it. And one of the biggest things that it has is an experimentation platform. Now, with this business that's been going on for so long, why, with it being so successful, why would we want to modernize? Part of this problem is that 25-plus-year-old code base built in a monolithic architecture with some attempts at SOA. We had a few very successful models at it, but we had this very big kind of hybrid model of our system. And so this was deployed to several bare metal roles. And the problems we were running into was that we weren't able to deploy as quickly anymore. We didn't have good testing. We didn't have good data ownership. There was just a lot of general problems that were hard to get to because it was such a tightly coupled monolithic architecture. So what we did was I came in about 3 years ago to start working on this modernization project. And what we started off with was designing a distributed architecture and getting everybody excited about it. So what we have here is kind of just what's becoming a pretty standard model of applying a distributed architecture that allowed us to start using the right tools for the right job. By separating these things out and decoupling these layers and giving us a lot more flexibility to move things, we could start migrating from the monolith a lot easier. And the federated graph became a critical piece of this thing. And this is one of the more important things that we found when doing this, when selling the graph and getting people excited about it. We found that it was better to start talking a lot about the back-end benefits. We know what the benefits are to the front end. We know how, about how it solves the over and under fetching problem. We know about all these cool things like that. But a lot of the times, the back-end folks, product people, did not understand what the graph was giving them. They didn't understand really the benefit that it gave to us. So one of the things I had to start doing was thinking about, how do I communicate this to the back end? How do I communicate this to other people that aren't on the front end that don't understand this? So here's a sample of some questions and answers that I gave to people. But one of the things I really found was a big selling point for the graph was that it was the benefit it gave to the back end in terms of how they could start tracking their data. One of the biggest problems we've always had with APIs, and especially with REST APIs, is you put a piece of data out there and now you don't know whether somebody's using it or not. A lot of times you have to, if you want to get rid of a field, you have to remove it and see if it breaks anybody. You don't always know how it's being used. You don't always know what data is being used. And so I started talking to the back end about, here's what we get for you. Here's how you can start owning your data. You start owning your service. You own the schema that goes with it. The front end uses that schema, but now you get to know who's using your data, when they're using that data, how often that data is being used. And when I started telling them about being able to delete a field with confidence because we can track that field to see if anybody's using it or not, that started getting them more interested. When I started talking about how we could start migrating from our Perl-based services to gRPC or to anything else really, and we could do that behind the graph without impacting the front end, that got them more interested. When I started talking about how this puts all of our presentation clients, the web, the app, everybody on the same schema, on the same data access, and all of that's controlled in the same layer, that started getting them more interested. But it really came down to tracking on those metrics, tracking on what kind of data we can give them on how their service is being used, as well as also not focusing too much on just the benefits of the front end, but giving them that ability to see how that data gets used. So when I was doing this, when I was talking to a lot of people at Booking, I found it is important to identify what's important to them when you're talking about the graph, because the benefits that we get on the front end are very important to a lot of things that we want to get into the future. But when we talk to the product, I learned I need to talk to them about what kind of things they can give us and give us some benefits for that, how we can start using the graph to expand our product capabilities. When I started talking to backend folks, database folks, I had to start talking to them about what it is I give them in terms of understanding data usage. And talk to them about what it will bring, not what it's going to bring someday. These are the benefits that we get with the graph, with the schema first approach, with getting that very solid upfront approach to how we see our data and how we use it. It gives them a lot. We can start hooking that into what it's going to give them today. The other thing is repetition and patience are very critical when selling this, especially to a large business with a 25-plus-year-old code base, with a lot of developers working on it, with a lot of different product pieces. It takes time to communicate this. Also, this happened during COVID, so lockdowns were happening. There's a lot of other, pressures and distractions at the time to sell this. So getting patient with this was necessary, and I had to repeat myself a lot. But I had to get comfortable with a lot of different ways of communicating to different folks, because we can't just talk about what the cool graph features that we get are. We have to really talk about how it helps the technology estate as a whole, what benefits we get for the business. So how did we get the graph in there? Because getting everybody excited about it, getting everybody sold on what the benefits are wasn't enough. Obviously, we have to start figuring out how we're going to do it. So we started off by identifying what we could split from our front end and our back end responsibilities, and how we could start moving those around. We already had initiatives in place to start building micro front end ecosystems. We already had SOA in place, but it was a very scattered approach to it. So when we started playing the migration, we started looking at what are the things that are going to give us the biggest bang for our buck. What is going to give us the most learnings? What are we going to be able to, what is going to help us really get this thing in place? Well, one of the things that we decided was that you have to go big or go home. Whenever tackling things, especially with a large product, with a large code base like this, doing small things, one-off things, don't really ever tell you what you need to know. You're always going to have questions about whether or not it's going to perform right or whether it's going to scale. And so everything's going to always have to come back to that question. So what we did was we tackled our biggest page. We took on search results, and then quickly followed by our property page. That is the most of our traffic. That is, many requests. I wish I had the data for you right now. Normally I do. I forgot it. But it's a lot of requests. So we took this page on. We said, okay, we're going to modernize this page. We're going to modernize this view to our distributed architecture. We're going to modernize our front end, and all of our new front end pieces are going to only request their data through the graph, and we're going to shift everybody over to the graph. This worked really well for us. We started getting a lot of learnings, and later on I'll show you just how much our traffic has even grown through this method. But it really taught us a lot about how to get this. We had a couple different approaches on how we did things for both search and property page. So we got to experiment a bit with how we wanted to implement it, what kind of data needed to be owned. We got to see, what happens when we start putting a lot of pressure on the services. We did also, and I'll get into that a little bit, learn a lot of things about what can go wrong. But getting these 2 pages wasn't enough. We have a lot of other things, and this is just the web. So the next step was to go even bigger. The next step is we started shifting our mobile, our iOS and Android clients over to using the graph. We had a BFF, or we have a BFF in place that the mobile apps have been using for quite a while, but that was creating a bit of problems for us because some of the data wasn't accessed the exact same way between app and web. There were some discrepancies there. Things, whenever we needed to make a change, it required changes in multiple places to be for multiple deployments. So we wanted to get the apps over to the graph as well. One of the problems we have with apps, obviously, is the long tail. You have many clients that don't update, especially in the Android space. We might have 2 or 3. We usually have about 2-year-old clients that we're still dealing with. That means that anything you put into the app is something you have to continue to support. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to get the app shifted over to the graph as fast as possible, so that way we could start making changes to the services behind the graph without impacting the clients as much. And so what we are doing is we're wrapping our BFF, our RESTful BFF, with GraphQL wrapper, so that the apps can shift over to that and start getting the same data that they're getting today the same way. And then we'll slowly migrate those calls over to using newer operations and get that cleaned up, so that they can start using the same thing that we're using on web and other areas. This is ongoing. We have our first clients that are first projects in the clients that are starting to migrate to that today. And we're seeing quite a bit of growth in it. It's pretty cool. Now, with all that, of course, what did we learn? We tackled some really big areas. And so obviously not everything went smoothly. One of the problems that we had was we have a lot of large kitchen sink style APIs that, they were kind of like one API in particular was designed for the search results page. And so it provided all the data for the page that was necessary. When we started breaking our queries apart into composable queries and using those, what we found is we actually started increasing the pressure on our services. Whereas we would have made one call before, we were now making 3 or 4 or more, many more multiple calls. A lot of that had to do with the way batch queries are working. This is a problem that is not easily solved with just a few little code changes, because this ultimately comes down to our SOA strategy. And also it comes down to, do we have our services in an SOA strategy properly to give us more flexibility in how we call them and when we call them. When you have large APIs, you start calling them more frequently, because if your queries don't line up and don't request the same fields, you obviously start sending multiple requests. So what we've done is we had to ask the front end to start using larger queries for these operations in order to improve their performance, so that we don't put too much pressure on the back end. Because rather than have them firefight and try to keep up with the number of requests and the queries, I'd rather them focus on shifting to a better SOA strategy. So we asked the front end to reduce the pressure on that, so that they don't have to worry about it. It does mean that we lost for a little while some of the better benefits with composability, but it is an effort across the architecture that has to be taken into account. We also ran into some security issues. Obviously, we always run into security issues. And one of the things that we found is we couldn't have client-side queries for a little while. We found a potential issue as we were trying to roll out exposing the graph to the client side. We had to pause that, because we found that we were potentially leaking some data. So fortunately, we caught it before anything happened. So it means our process is working well. It didn't deploy anything, so nothing to worry about. But the other major thing that we have, and it's still an ongoing problem, is with an old code base especially, we didn't really have a great clear picture of what data fields were used and where they were coming from. There's a lot of sediment that had built up over the years. There was instances where from one location it would be an int and another location would be a float. How do we reconcile those pieces of data? It takes a lot of code archaeology, a lot of digging into your history if you don't have it well documented already. And this is one of the benefits that I also talked about with backend devs, is that with the schema first approach that we get with GraphQL, it gives us a much better record of what our data is. We may not always understand where it's coming from, but at least we know that we're using that field. So it starts giving us much more clarity into how and what data we're using. The other big problem is, especially when people who are not on the front end are already familiar with GraphQL, is just general developer awareness and knowledge. Like I was talking about earlier, I had to communicate this in a lot of different ways to a lot of different people to help them understand what the benefits are. There was a lot of misunderstandings I ran across. And one developer thought that GraphQL was a query language for allowing client-side to query a database directly. Just very terrible miscommunications, misunderstandings on things. So it took a lot of time to put together training material, to educate people, to be persistent, be patient, just keep improving their understanding. A lot of one-on-one conversations just to talk about what the details were that could help people. So all of this worked really well. You know, we're obviously getting the graph going, and how is it doing? Obviously, we've done all this work to build this graph. We've put a lot of effort into learnings. We've expanded our graph capabilities. So what's happening? So we are already a lot faster in terms of our development cycles than we were before. Front end teams, as we're in addition to migrating to the front ends with the graph, it gives them that confidence that as we're moving the data from the services they had before into the graph, the data is available for them. They can use it. They're able to, with controlling their schemas, with controlling their queries, they're able to start making changes much more fast than they were before. Some of our development teams are seeing up to 40% improvement in their time to market, just because it's so much faster for them, just with the confidence in knowing from the backend side, they have the confidence in knowing that that change that they're about to make that won't break anybody. They can change. If we run across, when we're running across those cases where we're having to reconcile an int versus a float, right, we know who's using what fields. And so they know when they make a change, if they're going to break anybody, we can target them. They can get them, instead of hoping and waiting for somebody to find the problem and report it back, we'll be able to be more proactive about how we are communicating with different teams, just because we know which team is using it when they're using it. So it's a lot better. We're also finding new ways to use the graph and to move more business logic away from things that don't need to be there, more general logic. For instance, we are rolling out translations on the graph, translations and localization. So the backend just sends us keys. We translate it, localize it on the graph, and send that to our clients. This means that app, both iOS, Android, and web all get the same piece of data translated the same way. Gives us interesting opportunities for experimentation on translations there on the graph without having to affect the back end, because they just send keys to the translations. And the front end doesn't have to have any heavy translation logic. They don't have to worry about any of that, because all that gets done on the graph. Some really interesting things, because like I said, it allows us to move some of that logic into a centralized location that's shared for everybody. And that way we start making things more consistent across all our presentation, rather than run into weird differences because one system uses one key and another system uses a different key. It's also really helpful as we integrate and onboard new clients. Sorry, not new clients, new parts of the business. As we expand our offerings and we bring in other businesses, we've had multiple tech stacks. So we have things like multiple translation systems. Rather than have the front ends have to know about multiple translation systems, we have that all in one location there on the graph, and so we're able to start translating the keys there. It's really pretty cool stuff. Our usage has been increasing massively. I had a snapshot of some data from May 19th. You can see that we had 50 billion total operations in the previous 90 days at that point. Today, just about 6 months later, we have over 100 billion total operations in the last 90 days. You can see some of our daily operations are getting up to 1.6 billion, and there's still a whole lot more for us to start migrating over to the graph. There's still a lot of the parts of the whole booking system that's even still in the Perl stack. There's different parts of it, and so as we migrate these things, as we migrate more of the app calls over, this usage is going to increase dramatically. And we're also migrating things to AWS. So the graph is really helpful for that, because we have things in private data centers and public data centers. And so the graph really helps make it easy for us to communicate across those things, especially from the front end's perspective, because then we just don't have to worry about where it's deployed. So these numbers I was really surprised at these numbers because I hadn't seen them recently. I talked a little bit about what we are doing for the future. We have talked about a little bit about the translations on the graph. We're going to do more interoperability. We have accommodations, we have flights, we have other things that we're going to start. We want to be able to have the front ends show different products in the same UI at the same time. The graph makes it easy for us to make composable components, front end components. We can start moving things around more easily. Even with multiple tech stacks, we're exploring opportunities around having these composable front end components that we ship to each other and we're able to reuse things much more easily. I have ambitions of having a super graph across all booking holdings that would enable us to have even more interesting integrations. This is very much exploring on my part. It's kind of a pipe dream, but I thought it'd be really cool if we could have something that provides the front end more capability to easily query data across different things. That's a lot of things that we're starting to explore. So it's I think it's pretty fun, and I think that's about it for my talk. And thank you. We're still building the graph book, and there's still a lot of opportunities here. It's growing. We have a lot of jobs. Check us out here at jobs.looking.com. And if you're interested, we have lots of roles still open.
Amazing. Let's give a round of applause for Matt over in some emoji claps over in chat. And if you have any questions, post them there as well. Matt, I wanted to mention there are a couple comments that were made throughout, very much agreeing with you about the kind of the political aspect of making the sale, about how evangelizing the technical architecture internally is very important. Charles Brown said that. Kaka said 100% agree. 80% of the work is often non-technical. I would love to know a little bit about, you mentioned like the usage is increasing, and that's like a great quantitative stat. What are some like qualitative things? Did anybody who disagreed with moving to Graph come around as the implementation came in, or was everyone kind of on board with the way that you sold it internally?
There was a bit of, we had to prove it, not so much now. Now at this point, it's everybody's seen the value. It's become a critical part of our modernization efforts. Very early on, though, there was not a popular idea. A lot of that had to do more with the misunderstandings. It was something he said they thought it was for something else entirely. They weren't seeing how this was solved other problems that we had. And so as it was a lot of education and seeing it work. So sometimes, again, patience is a virtue.
Exactly. And Alexander in chat said that after successfully evangelizing such an architectural innovation at a big enterprise, you're completely equipped to run for political office as well. So I wouldn't recommend that personally, but you could if you wanted to, it sounds like.
No, I think I'm done with that. That's too much.
Fair enough. It doesn't look like we're getting any additional questions coming in. So I want to say thank you so much for giving the presentation, for giving us some insight into booking.com. I hope more people reach out about hiring, because tech jobs are always fun to find, right?
Yeah. And
Perfect. All right.
I hope so.
Thanks so much,
Thank you.